Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation.
Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation podcast. This is your host Salah, Elleithy, and I'm delighted to have with me today William Strydom. William and I actually had a conversation together recently, and we wanted to do another episode or another conversation. So this is part two of our previous conversation. So if you haven't listened to the first one, I recommend that you go back and listen to it, but you don't have to because we're going to be exploring a different topic. So William, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me back, Salah. That's always a good sign for me if people ask me back.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk to you and explore different topics and our journey for professional coaching and leadership and everything else that we've been learning about doing this kind of work. So I know the theme today is we wanted to kind of focus on leadership and a bunch of other topics, but that's really the main one. I guess I maybe we can start with what got you interested in this topic of leadership to begin with.
Well, twofold. One is when I'm working in organizations, part of it for me is doing more leadership development. It's one of the things I think that's needed and can probably elevate organizations and the people, the way that they work together and the relationships there. So that's the one aspect. Mm-hmm. And the other aspect is I know you did the Coactive Leadership course. So I'm also very curious around that. So I also want to throw and bring you into the conversation today so you can share a little bit of what you're allowed to share there and want to share around that for my curiosity a little bit as well and for the listeners.
You know, I guess maybe stepping back and giving context if people didn't listen to the first part. So we both work in the Agile space. We're both coaches. We're both have been through this journey of, the coactive coaching and ORSC. You also have done ORSC, the organizational relationship system coaching. So it's been a progression. Like, in the beginning, I was more focused on teams. So I work with teams. I work with development teams, but, they don't have to be in the software space, but the teams who are trying to deliver some sort of a product or a service, and was mostly interested or helping around, like if we put like a theme on like all of the agile practices, it comes maybe it falls under this idea of like productivity maybe or performance. So we're trying to deliver something of value to our end users or customers sooner. And as I worked with team members, I realized, or I started to notice, that there's also a portion of that needs to be coaching one-on-one, some team members. And then I realized, okay, I need to up my game and start to do, get more training around leadership coaching and leadership development. So, after coactive coaching, I signed up for the coactive leadership coaching, which is a 10-month program. And that has helped me really to bring a lot more of myself and just bring my whole self, not just one aspect. And it's funny because I was like thinking about like what's the best definition of leadership before we started this conversation. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite definitions that I usually look at and think about often is this definition by Warren Bennis. He's like a leadership guru in the space of leadership, and he had multiple quotes on leadership, but this one that resonated with me the most is leadership is about becoming yourself. It's that simple, and it's also that difficult. I think when we get into the conversation around the leadership circle and other models, we can connect those pieces. But that's really what draw me to coactive leadership, the experiential aspect of things, and journey of discovery, how to become more of myself, how to bring that more into the work that I do.
Thank you for sharing that quote. That's wonderful. How to become more of yourself. Because there's also, my definition is not as succinct as the quote you had there. Because for me, it's kind of, there's this adage where we go, leadership is not a title or a position. It's how you behave every day. I kind of look more through the lens of behavior. And for me, it's like, and you could be a scrum master, a product owner, a developer on a team. You could be the CEO of a company. You can be a leader in any of those positions. And what resonates with me as you were saying that, because this comes from the leadership circle that both of us did, that training, which kind of falls for executive training. But part of that is where they talk, you start living from the inside out instead of the outside in. And that was, as you were explaining that to me, yep, that's even putting it more succinct than that. So just becoming yourself and being yourself in whatever situation.
The quote exactly is becoming a leader is synonymous with becoming yourself. It's precisely that simple, and it's also that difficult. And I think what you said about leadership is not a position, because that's really a misconception that leadership is about, positional title. And there is still a leader, in terms of a leadership team in an organization, and really like responsible for the organization, the results and all that stuff. That's still a valid perspective, but there is more to leadership than just the title. And as you mentioned, there may be people who are not in a positional leadership, and they still are considered leaders in their in their organization, their team, or in their community. So it doesn't have to be like a specific title for a person to be a leader.
And that's why as you were describing that, what's coming up for me is a little bit around that, where people talk about, oh, that's a natural born leader, he or she carries themselves, it's a way that their presence is being felt on a team, or even sometimes in the community, or wherever they find themselves, and how they can influence other people, like help them to see things different, or do things differently, or behave differently, just from being there and the influence they have on others.
So when you decided to get more into that space, learning about leadership, and understood that this is not a position, it's more of an action, really. And what was some of the steps you took to immerse yourself into that domain?
Lovely question, Salah. Yeah, it is. What came up for me, I had this curiosity around, so what is leadership, Mm-hmm. And then I figured out we need to look at this from various lenses or perspectives. And part of that came from when I was doing some reading from Robert Keegan, and he's got that subject-object paradigm, which goes with adult development a little bit. So I started to go down that rabbit hole around. Part of this is adult development, and we need to take that leadership, even though it is within us, but we need to take it out so we can look at it like an object from different sides or views. And then I started, so what are all the different ways we can look at leadership? So part of it, and this kind of also comes from some other courses I've been on, where I started to realize this is why they brought us into what is spiral dynamics, because that was Claire Graves looking at it from the perspective of values. What do we value as leaders? Then I started to look a little bit more around, so this work around the integral theory from Ken Wilber's work. Part of what he built in there is looking at leadership from different consciousness levels. And part of that is that saying from Einstein, where they go, the problems that was created is not going to solve at the same level of consciousness. You've got to go to a higher level of consciousness to solve it. And that's kind of where that started to make sense to me after I figured out what did Wilber really mean by this level of consciousness. And then we also got from Action Logic, which is Bill Torbett's work he's got a book called Action Logic. And there it's around the way that we think will influence how we behave, and which will then influence your leadership style. And so all those things kind of came into play. And there isn't one way this is the answer. They kind of all interlock with each other. And the manifestation that rolled out of this for me was when we look at, reinventing organizations from Frederick Laloux, was if you have these, you really get what leadership styles is, then you can build different kinds of organizations based on what your leadership style is. And a lot of people were going, oh, this is the answer that he's got in his book. And for me, it's just different people are at different stages, so they will need different solutions and different leadership styles, which is very convoluted now that I've put all of that and now I want to go. So what did you take out of that little snippet that I just downloaded there?
Yeah, no, that's that a lot of different models and areas to explore here too, or to unpack. You talk about leadership circle, the integral, and then a Frederick Laloux model. And what I'm actually, hearing you say, or at least, that's what that's coming up for me, is this idea of consciousness. The first thing that usually happens to anyone who wants to change is they become aware or have a different level of awareness that they want to change, and or they want to acquire a certain skill in a specific domain. And leadership is not any different. Like you said, it's not like, you mentioned earlier that leadership, there's this saying that that this person is a natural born leader, and we know from our learning journeys and experience that that's not true. You maybe have a lot qualities that make you a leader, but it's not something that you cannot learn. It's something that you can learn if you invest the time and effort and attention. So that gets us to this point, and you can pick any model to go deeper into it. But that gets us to this question of like, how do we become more self-aware? What brings the level of consciousness or awareness to someone that can decide, okay, I need to be a better leader. And we can share our own journeys, but I'd like to hear from you. How is that for you?
All of these, when I look globally at all of these things, it kind of comes down to, and this is things that comes from Michael Hammond, where he was talking about sense and sense making. Of course, we all get the same information flowing to us, and it's how we make sense of it, and then the sense making that we do with it, and then going into what actions we do. And it locks a little bit in with the things from the leadership circle. The book that's coming to mind there is Mastering Leadership by Bill Anderson and Adams, that wrote with him, Bill Adams. And they talking about being reactive versus creative. And for me, it's that conscious choice that you make, but you have to be aware of it first, like you're saying. Am I just reacting to this? This person just brought me, and I'm just going to role play here a little bit, where you have that situation in organization. Here's the milestone and the team didn't make it, and the leadership comes down with, now you're going to work overtime and make the deadline because it's absolutely needed. And then you ask them, and to me that's like a reactionary thing coming up. We on the creative side, we could go, who made up the milestone? What's the minimum we need to do to make the commitment? What's a different way to look at it? So you get into the creative space where you will do, what can we actually solve it, versus trying to find blame and things like that. It becomes more of a negative space versus that creative, positive space. That's kind of what's coming up for me around that. So it's kind of like working with this reactive versus creative, but a little bit below that surface, there's what are we sensing, or what are we reading into the situation? And then how are we going to react on that? What will come up? And like you said, first internally to us, and then our external, how do we behave or react to the people around us?
To envision, because we're going to be on audio, the kind of like, if we visualize the leadership circle, it's as the name indicates, it's a circle, right? And that circle is divided into 4 areas. And the top part of that circle is it talks about the creative competencies. And then the bottom half of the circle talks about the reactive tendencies. And then on the left side, it's more focused on, I believe, relationships. And then the right side is more focused on tasks. And so what you're saying is like, if even just to think about that circle and the different parts of that circle, creative, reactive, relationships, and tasks. You just described a scenario of a leader who are more focused on the task, maybe task orientation. They're heavily, focused on getting the thing done and, meeting the dates and all that. So, and that usually there is some sort of balance or mismatch between what they want and how they show up. And so just, we talked a little bit, we started with like, how do you become aware that you need to be, or at least bring that level of consciousness to to know that, okay, maybe I need to do some work on my leadership skills, or I need to become a better leader. It seems abstract, but if you look at some of these models, they can help you point to where you need to focus. Maybe your response is usually in the reactive phase, the tendency to react to things and from a place of protection or compliance. And we're using the leadership language here, but so the impact from that stance can backfire, will not bring the results that you're hoping for as a leader. I certainly have been in that space, and the more you lead or from a reactive stance, the harder it gets to make a bigger impact.
It's almost like you are invoking or inviting like resistance when you work. And I've had teams leadership teams where they start to talk. The way they internalized it was they were going, "Oh, that's below the line thinking versus above the line thinking," with the circle with reactive versus creative, and it was a way for them to catch each other and point it out, but in a way where it becomes constructive, where they go, "It feels like we're going below the line. How do we stay above the line?" And it was just a way for them to do a course correction without making the other person wrong or anything. Just, okay, let's rethink that. How might we stay above the line to do that? Because they were finding a lot of times, like you were saying, because there's a people side and a task side that live above the line in the creative space. And there is a balance between it. We do need to finish tasks, otherwise we'll never accomplish something. But we also need to foster the relationships and how the people interact with each other, and how we create as leaders space for them to do that, which is all that area what we talk in the creative space or above the line.
I remember, and I'm sure you've experienced the same, when I did the leadership circle, we were still in person. So they also they used a mat, and people would go to different stances and they visit that stance, and they start to think about, like, what would be the impact from that stance versus the reactive stance versus the creative stance, and where do you want to bring more of versus less of. I think the best metaphor that comes up for me, and maybe I got it from the class, is this idea of you're trying to move the boat while the anchor is dragging down. So you're not really moving, or you're moving very slow, and at any point the boat will just stop moving. So the idea here is to find what is the gift, or what's the gift of the reactive, and what's the cost of the reactive versus creative. It is definitely something that is very hard. It was hard for me, this idea of you have to accept that the reactive has served some purpose. It's very similar to the concept of the saboteurs and values from the professional coaching realm, but it's really, here are some reactive tendencies that have gotten me where I am, so far. But in order to grow and become a better leader, you need to start to shift your focus from operating from the reactive tendencies to more of the creative competencies. So that's really the idea, is to bring that level of awareness and consciousness around, like, where do you find yourself going to reactive mode versus creative mode, and do you have the awareness to realize or to learn that you're in the reactive mode right now, and you can pivot or shift. Just like you mentioned the example of the leader who said, okay, we're operating from below the line, we need to move above the line, and then self-correct.
I love where you said there's a gift in it, in the reactive below the line. I want to zoom out a little bit and then come back to that to tie these points together. Because part of that model is a little bit, and this is in that book, Mastering Leadership, there's 5 levels, and it starts with egocentric, then you go to the reactive, then you go to creative, then you go to integral, and then you go to union. Most people find themselves in reactive, but you grow through these, and we talk about transcend and include. In other words, we all are egocentric. I mean, for me, I'm thinking back at my formative years, you're the central of the universe. The world revolved around me at that point. Yeah. And still I realized oh, the world is way bigger than me. I'm just part of it. It doesn't revolve around me. So you went out of egocentric into the reactive, and now you're starting to react on things and you're getting things done. That's the place of complying, protecting, and getting things done. And they all have gifts. So then as we go into the creative space, you want to once again transcend it and include it. In other words, it's still part of what we do. So even though you're being creative, you also still need to protect, comply, and get things done. And an example for me that sometimes come up, that you don't want to get so creative you don't comply, because otherwise we might have another Enron situation, which is what we don't want for leaders. What we want them is to become creative, but within the confines of, say, a regulatory space or whatever is there. There's always boundaries that we have. And how do you get creative within those boundaries? Or sometimes we change the boundaries, and hopefully for the better, not for the worse. And that's kind of what's living in that creative space.
It's interesting that this is not either or. It's more of a paradox, like, holding different thoughts and ideas at the same time. And then the idea is to how to balance so that the compliance and the reactive tendencies don't really become the default of how we operate as leaders, and what type of creative responses that we can bring into the conversation or bring into the culture, so that it can also scale or create a bigger impact for us, or for us as leaders, and for the teams and the people that we're working with. It is a tough balance, but this idea of awareness and then choice and then action, or we're now have different perspectives that we can operate from, rather than just like, a narrow idea around like, okay, here's the style or the default style that I can operate from, all reactive. And then I wonder why I'm not creating the impact that I want to create in my organization, or even in my team, or even like, even a smaller system, my family or community. So it's really finding that balance between staying in the reactive and how do I move more into the creative space. It's not something that can happen instantly, right? It's the model is supposed to bring higher level or deeper level of awareness or consciousness, and then based on that, the choice is yours as a leader or as a person to decide, where do I want to focus more? Let's say if I'm a leader that is mostly focused on task, and I have been there. I've been in a leadership role as a project manager, for example, someone who trying to get things done, trying to focus on due dates and tasks, and it's mostly in that task-oriented space. Sometimes that's the way we operate, as project managers can operate in or tend to operate in that space. But then if I become aware of that I'm mostly focused on task, and the relationship is really, there's a problem with relationships, then maybe I need to kind of balance or shift my focus a little bit from the tasks to relationships, and see how that new way of working can help in getting things done. So stretching the limits of my outside of my comfort zone. If I'm my default is task oriented, then maybe I need to think about shifting a little to relationships. If I'm mostly focused on relationships, and as you mentioned earlier, maybe nothing is getting done, or things are getting done slower than expected, maybe I shift a little bit more to the task. So it's not either or, it's just like, a spectrum that you can balance or dial up or down based on what impact you want to create in the space that you're in.
Yeah, it's like working with these paradigms of dualities, where a lot of people are like, tasks, you need to get tasks done, or the other people are, like you were saying, relationships and people working together, we need to do team building. And it's like we're saying, yes, it's both. Both of them are needed. It's not one over the other. And then it's, how do you find There's a time to do team building and there's a time to then fulfill tasks and get work done. And you oscillate between the two. The perfect example I use with people is like breathing. Which do you do more? Breathe in or breathe out? We do both all the time. You can't do one without the other. And it's there. It's needed all the time. And it's that one where we go, this is not an or, this is an and it's like, as leadership, you increase your range of leadership. And how do you hold then even more than two things at the same time, which are opposites, where people will view them as opposites? You start holding them as, yes, we need all of them. And now you start working in that very going from complicated to complex world where you're holding multiple things at the same time and you're getting all of them accomplished. Mostly through other people, not through yourself.
And then it's different because the coaching, we both went on the coaching journey as well. We're professional coaches and as coactive and or as coaches, and the coaching stance is different from the leadership stance, because as you said, leadership is getting things done through others or with others, and coaching is more about like nurturing and helping that person become who they want to become, and show up differently, maybe find what's causing the standing in their way, more about like growing the individual. And so there are two different stances. How different do you see those two stances, and how do you shift between them as you work with teams and leaders?
Great question there. I will probably give you an answer I've got now, and who knows, maybe in the future it will change. As always, as we learn more.
Disclaimer.
So what I'm going to say now is an answer. It's not the answer. If you a leader, you usually have a vision. There's something you want to bring about. There's something that is your vision for what you want to create, or why you founded a company, or why you're working on a team, or why you joined an organization. Their mission and vision is resonating with you. So there's something central in you that's awakened, and that's what makes you get up every morning and go do the work. That's kind of a little bit that I'm seeing in the leadership space. For me in the coaching space is we've also got our vision and mission, but a lot of it is around helping others. It's my mission is to help others. In other words, I'm putting myself on the side and I'm making that other person, be it their development or creating their vision come alive or whatever is there. So it's kind of like a peer relationship, and it's a supporting role. And a lot of things that's coming up for me in the coaching world is I don't have to have answers. I just have to have questions, and making things emerge and more of whatever the other person wants. And what they want and what I want may be two different things. And that's okay. Because as a coach, I want them to want more of what they want, not what I want. So that's kind of a little bit that's there. But I want to ask the same question for you, because I would love to hear your answers on these.
I'm going to look at the coactive coaching and the coactive leadership models, because that really helped me distinguish between the coaching stance and the leadership stance. And the coactive leadership model has these like different stances. One of those stances is called leading from behind. So it's like you said, like you're not the focus as a coach. Your players, if you will, or the individuals that you're working with are the focus. You're helping them grow and develop and become more aware of what is getting in the way of them breaking through or moving forward. And you do that by asking questions, a lot of good questions, powerful questions, generative questions, and all that, and listening, and all the coaching skills that we know. The leadership could be and that's still the coaching. I'm not saying that the coaching is not a leadership stance, it's just a different stance. And it might not be, if you're only leading from that stance, you may not get the results that you're looking for as a leader, or maybe different results, and it might take longer. So coaching still is a stance or an area that you can operate from as a leader. But there are other stances, leading from the front as a leader. You're like the vision and mission, you're giving the direction, you're helping people understand why we're doing what we're doing. So that's leading from the front. There's also the leading from the side, in which is a lot of support and helping individual growth and mentorship and recommending things that they learn and practice. And then the leadership from the field is another area. And so those are like four different stances in the coactive leadership model. And in the middle of all that is leading from within. So the idea here that we talked earlier about is this idea of awareness. The more awareness I have, or the more conscious, the higher the level of consciousness that I have based on the learning, or based on feedback that I get from others, or based on, models like the leadership circle models that help me bring a higher level of awareness so that I can lead better and work on myself. So it's not like the leadership, or leaders are not, it's not like when we think of leadership, we sometimes think, okay, I became like the CEO, or the executive leader of a company, and that's it. Like I've reached the top of the of the leadership
pyramid,
of the pyramid. But that's not really what we're talking about here. It's like, because leadership is a continuous work. It takes a lot of continuous work, and that's where the leadership within is about in this model. So that gives me a lot more distinction between the leadership as a leading from behind, as a coach who are trying to help the individuals and teams and leaders, versus the other stances, leading from the front, the side, and from the field, because the context is different. If you're going to an organization, and it's probably like there's a lot of different models that also support these ideas, that if you, let's say you're joining a company as a leader, and there's a lot of chaos, and there's a lot of missed deliveries, and morale issues and problems, it's going to be very hard to just have one stance to lead from. Coaching stance and is not going to be the only or enough of a stance to lead from. You're going to have to move to different stances as you lead the company through the whatever situation that they're in.
I love that you're bringing this in, and the way that you unpack the coactive leadership model for us. There isn't like one leadership stance that will work in all situations. Like you say, you've got to read that. And as you were talking around this, what came up for me, and I'm hoping this is complementary to what you were saying, because the coactive model, like you're saying, there's leading from the front, leading from the back, leading from the side, leading from the field, and then leading from within. Where there's a book called Primal Leadership, and this is from Goldman and Boyazzi. And what I appreciate because part of this is emotional intelligence, where you've got to be able to, what's the context? Where am I finding myself in? And then into which leadership style am I going to move? And what I find useful around that book, as you were describing this, is they describe 7 leadership styles in the specific book. And some of it will fit into that leading from the front, which is sometimes command and control or pace setting. And it is needed at times. Like if there's a crisis, you don't want to go into a coaching leadership style where you ask people questions around it. It's like, okay, there's a fire. We now all there's the escape. Let's move. Let's get out. Right. So you're giving concrete directions. You want compliance at that stage. So you get out. And then once you go outside, you can go, okay, now what are we going to do now that we see the building in flames and we all safe? Yeah. But you don't do that in the room.
Right.
And it's the same. And as you were talking, that leading beside, some people also struggle with that. And that's where you're going, well, maybe that's where democratic leadership style comes in, because you want to ask everybody what's their input, what can they bring to the table, or an affiliative leadership style that's used there. And like you're saying, also the other one that I really appreciated you brought up is the visionary leadership style, because there's a lot of people that lead through that. And then leading from behind could be a coaching leadership style. And even the book I find helpful there, especially for people in managerial roles, is The Coaching Habit from Michael Banja-Steiner. Great book for them. 7 questions. And then it's just a little scaffolding that helps them through that process. So they move a little away from the commanding leadership style to a coaching leadership style. And it helps broaden their leadership and what they do and how they go about it.
It's really funny that you brought this example of like the building on fire, because it's like, I was thinking, that would be frustrating if we're like there's a crisis and you're going to ask people questions, and obviously that's an extreme scenario, but like to to make the point clear here is there are some instances or contexts where there is a lot of pressure, and maybe the culture, the team, or the person is not ready for coaching or taking that stance. So these models are supposed to expand our range of how we operate, not to become the way to do things, but it helps to have these models again to find like, where do we find ourselves leading from the most, and is that impactful? How what's the impact of being in that stance for as my default stance? So that can help me decide, okay, now that I'm conscious that I'm mostly operating from coaching stance, and what do I need to change? Which stances do I need to try more or bring more to what I do, and see what's different. I've been in that situation. Like I'm sure you've seen, you've experienced that too. Like when after finishing like coaching training and learning a lot about professional coaching and practicing professional coaching, that becomes part of your toolkit that you practice a lot more than other stances. And then the more the more you expand your range, the more you find that, okay, maybe not everything is gonna work from that coaching stance. I need to change my stance more.
Yeah, I love what we're saying there, because it's almost like I'm like, even though we're talking about leadership now, it's like I want to come a little bit back to like the agile coaches who's listening to this. And part of it for me is, if we do look at the Agile Coaching Competence Model, that's why we've got, there's almost like, I think with the latest update, there's now 5 competencies built in there. So we've got the facilitation, individual coaching, team coaching, training, mentoring, and we move between them because they all different ways of leading. And sometimes we do all 5 in like one training session you're doing or whatever. You might be doing a little bit of team coaching because there's some dialogue that you're busy working with, or you might have to facilitate them to keep everything moving forward. And you might be sprinkling in some, a little bit of advice in the form of mentoring, and you're doing it all at the same time. But for me, when I started, I had to build each of those competencies. So for a long time, I was concentrating just on facilitation. There would have been a moment to do a little bit of training, but I'm focusing on facilitation. So you let that go. And then other times I was just doing training. And now I'm getting to the point where I can integrate those, and it becomes a real blend, which of course is for people who wants to imitate and you just start, it's not that easy. And so for them, I just want to say, it's okay. You can focus on one at a time and then integrate them later. And I was kind of like explaining a little bit for me, what was that? Because I know you also an agile coach. So how did those 5 ones show up for you?
I can relate to what you're saying. Like they do show up. Some could show up like in one session, or could show up like in a more of a focused way. So if I'm facilitating a session for a group or for a team, my focus is facilitation. Maybe I'll bring some coaching questions into the session to kind of move things along, or to help the group reflect back, or either help them get more clear on things, or move to action, or whatever the arises in the situation. But yeah, it doesn't mean that one stance is bad. It's really, the idea is like, okay, when you're learning, you may be focused on just one stance and you're practicing that. That's all you have in your toolkit at this point of time. And then as you expand, you start to, okay, navigate, okay, this may be more coaching here, this more facilitation here. And sometimes, like you said, it may be even like fuzzy, and you don't really have you're integrating all the skills together. You become like at the stage of like, unconscious competent, or maybe at some point you don't really know what skills you're using. You're just, it's part of you. It's part of how you're navigating the situation. So yeah, I agree with you about that. You could move between these stances, or you could focus on one, or you can integrate all of them together. So it's part of this holding things lightly, and not being attached to, okay, here I'm a coach, I'm gonna just do coaching, and that's all I'm gonna do.
Yeah, and so I want to, if I may, move us back to the leadership realm. And as we were talking around these various leadership styles that's out there, And my advice on that is just start increasing your repertoire of leadership styles. There isn't one that's the ultimate, but the more capable and competent you get in different ones, the better your leadership will be experienced by the people around you. And I don't know, what's your thoughts on that? That was kind of how because for me, it's like, how do I, and even when I'm coaching people, be it executives or even just scrum masters and product owners, for me, it's like, how do I keep increasing their range of what they're doing? What do you think about that?
I think that it's like any skill, there is some range to it. So yeah, finding different styles, and then finding what style resonates with you the most, and then trying different styles as you go can definitely help in making a bigger impact. Again, the because I'm trained in the coactive leadership model, and that's usually where I refer to. It's like the different leadership, like you could be leading from beside, behind, from the field, from the front, but really any leadership model can give you different styles or different range that you can see, okay, this is the style that resonates with me, and I think that's where I gravitate towards, and then based on that, you might want to try different styles as well and see what happens, because that's how we learn, by trying things and seeing what happens, and then reflecting back on what was the impact of that. Did that match my intention, what I really intended to do, or do I need to shift to different style? And sometimes that you don't really have a lot of time to do that. Sometimes it has to be in the moment. So maybe you walk in with a style of leadership that you're more comfortable with, and then you find that that's not landing with people or with the team that you're working with, and so you have to shift your style to make an impact. Otherwise, if your style is this authoritative and more assertive style of leadership, and the group is not really, that's not how they respond, or then there's this mismatch, and you can either shift your style to create a bigger impact, or you could find another group that style matches more. And that's really my thought on this, is having a range. It's like it's really like an artist. Like if you're painting a picture, you're not just using one color. I mean, you could, but it's not going to be pretty.
Well, there is black and white paintings, but I hear you. It's that there is the ones full of color, and they take a couple and they create thousands of variations of it.
Yeah. So the topic of leadership is really wide and deep, and we're just bringing some models that can help bring consciousness and awareness for us as people who work with leaders or are working on ourselves to become better leaders. So I want to shift a little bit to other models, because we talked about the leadership circle, we talked about the coactive leadership model. What other leadership models do you work with or look at to bring more awareness or consciousness to your leadership and to others?
As you were unpacking these, there's also, so I'm getting deeper into structural dynamics that was created by David Cantor, and it's a model. It's around communication, but it's also so much bigger. The fundamentals, or it's got 4 layers around it, where one is our speech patterns, which we talk about, the 4-player model. And it's also layered. And above that, it's like the communication domains, or the words that we select. It's like the language we speak in. And we talk about, is it affect, meaning? Now I'm going to get to the point where power, and then affect, meaning, and power. And above that is what we talk about, what operating systems they come from. And we're not talking computer operating systems here. We're talking about people's speeches. So we say, is it an open system, a closed system, or a random system? And then there's a 4th layer where it's kind of like, where do we come from? It's kind of like we talk about our childhood stories, or what happened in our formative years, because it impacts on how we behave and communicate with each other. And so once again, this is all around range and how we can become more comfortable in all of those. So those first three models become, it's a multiplication. So it's like there's 4 speech acts, there's 3 domains, and then there's 3 operating systems. So it's 3 times 3 times 4, and that's how many combinations of things you can have when you work with people and teams. And it's a lot of this work is around when we work with teams, when do we intervene? And we do it in service of them to create their role or their goal, I should say, or whatever they want to achieve. And part of that lies in just raising their awareness around things. Because when we start working with teams, you can't tell them what to do. From a systemic coaching point of view, that never works, because they're going to do what they want to do. But what you want to do is make them aware of what's there so they can choose different paths to go down. And one of the things I've learned there is sometimes when you raise the awareness, they won't choose the path you thought they were going to take. And that's okay. It's whatever works for them at that point. And then they learn from that. And then you just keep revealing what's there for them. We talk about revealing the system to themselves. So now I'm kind of talking more in the ARSC language and things like that. And so part of it around the structural dynamics is getting people to become more comfortable with the other, or there's things we gravitate to that we really like, and there's things that we sometimes are averse to until we see what's the good in it. And then we start integrating it. And then we become more whole, and our range increases. So what was happening for you as I was explaining a little bit around structural dynamics and the ARSC things?
I think this is a really good model for like the key word for me that you mentioned that I highlighted is the in my head is this idea of like speech recognition. Most leaders don't really pay attention to how people talk to each other, and that could be another clue of how to bring your stance as a leader. You know, what stance do you want to bring into the conversation now that you are more familiar with the speech the team or the individuals in the company are using? So we all love, like the agile coaches, specifically, we love this when we hear people like that's the way it is around here type of thing, like, you know, that's how, because that sentence usually highlights the way that people operate. This thing that they have been doing for a long time has worked for them up to now, and now they're stuck. They don't know how to move forward with the same kind of thinking, you know, with the Einstein quote that you mentioned earlier, like, you know, they need a different type of thinking to move forward, but they're stuck because that's how they've been doing it, and that's how it worked before. Now it's not working. I'm listening to myself, and like the developer say it works, so it worked on my machine, right? But now it's not working in production or something. So it's like it worked for us in the past, but it's not working now. So what do we do? And so that kind of the language, or highlighting the way that people speak can help the leaders find ways of, okay, let's change the conversation. How do we change the conversation? Frame a question around, like, you know, how do I change people and tell them what to do? You know, as you said, and I have also found that this really never works to tell people what to do. It's now, how do I change the conversation, or how could we change the way that we talk about things? So yeah, that Cantor model can give another level of awareness or consciousness around, like, okay, speech. I know last time we spoke, you talked about like this, you know, the different positions, the mover and opposer and follower and bystander. And so you can, if you can notice these things as a leader, you can start to think also about like how people interact with each other, and, you know, the different styles that people bring to the conversation, and what's the impact of that on the team and on the organization overall.
And then all of a sudden it gets, as you're noticing what people and how people are saying it, then you can go, are we below the line or above the line? So it kind of comes back. These models I always talk around models as lenses to view the world. Now, sometimes we can have too many lenses and your glasses will fall down, but you can overlay some of them to a certain extent as needed. And then it becomes how can you change the speech acts that's happening in the conversation so that we can move from below the line to above the line? So all of a sudden we go from reactive to creative. And it becomes that intervention that happens. And it could be somebody there acting as a facilitator, making that happen, or a coach. Or it could be the team becomes self-aware around it. You've educated them around it so they can become self-aware around that as a team or even an organization, and notice that, and it becomes their way of working. The other model that's really helpful around this, because for me it's around the aspect of dialogue, which is really needed in, especially when you get to senior leadership, because the work they're doing is through dialogue and conversation with each other. And it's Otto Sharma has got this fields of conversation that he talks about. There's a progression that happens. It starts with politeness. Nobody wants to rock the boat. Everybody wants to keep everything as a whole. Then it moves into breakdown where, you've got your point, I've got my point, and we talk about the line of advocacy, and that's debate shows up there and things like that. Then it moves to what we call curiosity and inquiry, where people becomes curious about the other's point of view and what's there. And that's the place where things are now in pieces. And then as you move to generative dialogue, now it gets to the point where you get co-creation and how people build on each other's ideas. And that's the place that we need to get organizations in so they can have generative dialogue. So whatever, because the world is full of challenges, opportunities, problems, whatever you want to call it. And one of the things I believe is we do need, one of the solutions around it is having generative dialogue. So we can come up with how do we change this potential issue or problem into an opportunity and something that we can have a solution for, or, we can lessen the pain or make something go away. But we need generative dialogue to get there, which means we need to build on each other's ideas.
I love that metaphor you used about the models, are ways to see the world, or lenses to see the world. I think, there are so many different leadership models and things that we've have experience with, things that we have learned about or have been also learning more about. And, it's really definitely for someone who's not familiar with all these leadership models, they could get overwhelmed, like, there's so many of them. What should I do? Where should I start? So that would be something that, maybe we could talk about a little bit, like how does someone who wants to become a better leader, whether as a positional leader in an organization or just a leadership as a skill, where do they start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't know which of these are better than the others. And the other thing I also want to say is, from me, you don't need all of them. I appreciate when you were sharing around the coactive leadership. I would probably highly recommend that for people, because all the people that I have met and interacted with that's been through that program view the world in a wonderful way, according to me. So that's why I would recommend people to go through that program. And I'm not making you say that, even though you went through it, but me experiencing and talking with you and interacting with you, it's wonderful. So for me, that's one area to go and explore. The other ones I would recommend is the Leadership Circle and reading Mastering Leadership. There's a whole bunch of things in there. And for me, it's always, once you start with one, see what resonates with you. What do you want to do next? But those for me are two great entry points. And the other thing I want to say is, just wherever you are is also good. And just do more of what you know, and have choices is the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
And now I want to say, that was my answer. What is your answer on that one?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me, but I agree with the starting points. I think the coactive leadership model is a good place to start, and you don't have to do like I did, like the 10-month program. They do have like a 3-day leadership experience class that you could take. But there are even other models that I have been that I've learned about over my journey. Like when you said that above the line, below the line, it reminded me of the work of Christopher Avery, the responsibility process, where the above the line is responsibility, and then below the line is all the different stages, like getting into blame and judgment and obligation, and then a series of other stages. But I think, I mean, if I use like my consulting answer, it depends. Like, do you want to work on yourself to become better? Do you want to work with the team, like a leadership model that can help you with your team? So it could be that you start with the Cantor model, understanding speech recognition and how you can work with your team and pick up on these things. Or if you want to work on yourself, it could be the leadership circle, and they also have a leadership circle profile for teams and leadership teams. So that could be another area. But it doesn't matter where you start. It just, it matters that you start and start to have, start to find like, how do I bring more awareness to my leadership style? And like you said, even if you don't want to learn about any of these models right now, you don't have the time or the opportunity, you could start to reflect and just to notice when you say something as a leader, where's that coming from? Like, is that something that help you make a better impact? And if so, I'm going to use a question from Clean Language. What evidence do you see that support that claim? So it's like, I think I'm making a bigger impact, but what are you seeing that supports that? So it really varies. If you were to start somewhere, I think just notice how you react, or how do you come across from a reactive or creative. Definitely using a model can help to tie it together, but and give you more structure. But like you said earlier, even if you just accept where you are and then figure out where you want to focus, where do you want to focus to improve your leadership? That kind of was a long answer, but that would be my recommendation.
I love that you brought in that aspect around reflection and like journaling. That's a great practice to start, because part of what's also, as you were talking around that, what kind of came up for me is there is a big aspect in leadership around getting feedback. And the reason I'm bringing that up is we've got what was my intention and what was my impact. I will know what's my intention because it's in my head.
Yeah.
But the person that I'm talking to or leading or whatever I'm doing in my behaviors, they have the impact. And I will only know what's the impact once I see how they react or how they give me feedback.
Yeah.
And so that's important, because I will sometimes do something and I get this strange reaction and I go, what's happening here? You're looking for feedback now. And then something comes to light and you go, oh, that was not my intention. And that's kind of where we need, as leaders, we need to get more aware. And like you were saying, it's that being in the moment. What is happening and how do I change what just happened so that I can get that outcome I'm looking for, versus I had an intention and now I've got this different impact that I caused. So
it's like the question of like, do I start working on myself first, or do I start working with my team first? And it's like the metaphor you mentioned earlier. It's like, do I inhale or exhale or like, breathe in or breathe out? You got to do both, right? So and it's not necessarily linear. I took a linear approach. I know, I started with coactive coaching, which is more one-on-one, and then ORSC. I did some classes ORSC too, so more in the team or systems, and then leadership. So I kind of I picked things based on where I saw I needed to level up my game in that specific area, but it wasn't intentional. It was like based on what problems am I facing that I want to solve right now. And so I think trying to approach this in a more of a circle than a straight line is much better approach than say, okay, I'm gonna learn about myself first and then I'm gonna learn about others, because they go hand in hand. The way that you learn about yourself is to work with others, and that will help you learn about yourself. So it's a cycle or feedback, like you said. So I think, we covered a lot of leadership models and, talked about, hopefully that was, that's something that will at least spark some ideas and interest to people who listen to this, and specifically coaches and agile coaches or scrum masters and people who want to level up their leadership skills. And what else that we want to leave with here? Is there any sort of takeaways or things that you would like to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I was thinking about what would be a great closing statement. And then, of course,
Profound.
nothing came to
I
mind.
want something profound.
Then nothing happened, for me at least. But what I do want to say is, if there's take away from this conversation, whatever you resonates for you, and if one of the few things you do is just start reflecting on what you're doing, please do that. There's nothing wrong. Sometimes it's that the smallest of steps you take will start you off on that journey. So if that's the least you do, please do.
I think that's a good way to get starting. It actually remind me not to add more leadership models to the conversation here, but what's coming up for me that I explored as well is this model called the conscious leader, the conscious leadership model. It was very simple, but it's really powerful, and something that I've thought about in the past is this idea of using the metaphor of navigation, like, here's where I'm at. Here's my starting point, my destination. So find where that is. Like find, and then, accept that, accept that you're there. Unless you accept where you are, it's not going to be easy to change, where you are, right? And so, and then are you willing to shift? Now you have a choice. Once you know where you are, you have a choice whether you want to shift that to something else. So accept where you are, and then are you willing to make a shift now that you know where you are? And then, where is that shift gonna be? Like the destination of where you're going. And it's really just those three variables. If you can start to explore those variables, then it leads you to somewhere, hopefully a better version of yourself, or better version of your leadership self. But you could also, talk to someone who has been through this journey, like William, or myself. We, definitely happy to help you on this journey, whether through the leadership circle model to understand where you are, or other leadership model that we've picked up on our journey of obsessed learning.
Or whichever one stood out for you. Just say, I want to talk about that one.
Right,
That's
right.
okay too.
So I know we're coming to the end here. We're out of time. Is there any anything else? Any pointers? Maybe, I know you mentioned the Mastering Leadership book. Any other good resources as far as like reading or watching?
Yeah, there's so many here to choose from. There's Leadership Agility from Joseph and Joyner, which I also found helpful over the years. The one where Primal Leadership was the one I talked about from Goldman and Boyazzi. Yeah, and once you look at one of them, if you look in the back of them, they normally have references, and because that's what I do, and that's how I find a whole bunch of these others. The work in the leadership space is very interlinked with each other, and once you start reading one person's book, you'll see they're referencing other people. So get curious. I mean, some of the names I want to throw out here: Susan Cook-Reuter. If you look at her work, wonderful stuff there. Bill Torbett, Robert Keegan, Don Beck. He took Claire Graves' work further in spiral dynamics. If you want to start reading the very big opus books, Ken Wilber is also there for you. Frederick Laloux, Reinventing Organizations. That's, for me, it was a quick read. I have run across people that says that was a longer read for them. Find out what it is for you, if you like it or not. Sometimes you start reading a book and you can put it down. You don't always have to finish whatever. If it resonates, keep reading. If it doesn't, put it down and find another one that does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There are a lot of resources and material out there. The theme I'm picking up here from what we're both saying is start where you are, and the way to get clarity is to take action, not to wait and ruminate for a long period of time. Just find where you are and then take action, or take action, and that will give you more clarity. William, I appreciate your time again and insights, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you and learn from you, and hopefully we get to meet again soon.
Thank you, Salah. It was great chatting with you, and I even learned some from you today. So thank you for that. And enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, you too.
Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or take action on. Remember, take action and get clarity. Then repeat.